Good evening. Still not very warm, but okay, I'll make do. I've grown up in Australia, and I came here. I started a chain of preschools called Kangaroo Kids, and then it was time for my son to go to school. And I didn't want him going through the conventional rote learning, and that's all that was really available at the time, other than one school called the American School of Bombay. They're still allowed to call themselves the American School of Bombay. So I put him in that school. Thank God I was an Australian national, so I had access to the school. He's an Australian national. I could pay the fees in dollars. So one of the very few people who could have access to international schooling at the time, and one of the few people who could actually afford the fees. He started school mid-1995, and one day a parent representative of the school called me up and said, Miss Ashar, could you please send 100 apples to school? So I asked her why, what would you like to do with the 100 apples? And she said, oh, it's Halloween, we're having a Halloween party and we'd like to play Bob the Apple. So I said, oh, and what will happen to these apples after the kids finish bruising and battering the apples in Bob the Apple? She said, well, we just throw them away. And for me, that went against every grain as a parent, and what I was trying to bring my son up, already living in Pali Hill, already being one of the lotus-eating kids, and me trying to find him, try and keep him grounded in that whole sense of privilege. So that was my quest. I said, we need to start international schools at Indian affordable prices. Of course, affordable price is always a question, but then some form of quality comes at a cost. For me, the big thing was that for my son and for all the other kids, it's not about IQ. One of the things we talk about, whether we're talking about PISA or we're talking about standardized testing, I feel we're testing the wrong things. We're testing for maths, science, and what else? Maths, science, and reading. And to me, most of that's archaic. I mean, you've got iPads talking to you now. You don't even have to read. You don't really even have to write anymore. So for me, IQ anyway was always 10% of the entire formula that will make up the adult human success code. For me, the other 90% is made up of SQ, the spiritual quotient, the PQ, the passion quotient we can build in kids, and the EQ, the emotional quotient. When this mom said this to me, I sadly asked her, what is the legacy we will pass on to our kids if we allow them to play with 100 apples in this beautiful infrastructure of an international school, when in the slums close by and on the streets we have Indian children starving? I'd like to say that for me the word international is not essential because it only denotes what kind of examination the kids will sit. I believe all our schools can be international, even if they're CBSE or ICSE schools. All the schools that I operate under various boards, some CBSE, some ICSE, some IGCSE, and for me that they're all international schools because for me it's not about the board affiliation or the examination, but it's more about the universal best practices that we will practice in the schools, such as good student-teacher ratios, being assessed for depth and application of learning, and being accountable to parents by demonstrating real performances of understanding by their kids. All three boards that we offer have an equal focus on developing the Qs, the IQ, the PQ, the SQ, and the EQ. There are many challenges going forward. The first is, unfortunately, the majority of Indian parents do not understand academic and other areas of development that schools offer. Parents who look for an international school equate lavish infrastructure with the word international and high quality. With the cost of buying real estate or leasing real estate and developing the infrastructure means we will never have enough international schools. Again, I reiterate, my definition of international school is only based on best universal practice in learning. We're making some moves in the correct direction, but still, I say, for instance, the CBSE is currently talking about the CCE and open book exams, but I feel that if we just merely ape Western concepts and phrases without a deep understanding, it'll mean that implementation will always be a huge challenge. The small set of teachers who truly understand and can apply deep learning methodology to Indian and international boards are sorely lacking. So very often in our so-called international schools, we have teachers teaching a new curriculum framework in the conventional way. So while all the school billboards and ads talk the correct talk, such as holistic values, inquiry-based approach, multiple intelligences, and reaching one's highest potential, it would be interesting to really study how many of them are able to correctly walk the talk, given the skill sets of teachers who themselves have largely been brought up on a diet of rote learning during their schooling and a beard that does not really equip them to teach anything of international nature. It would be great if we could do a skill rather than qualification audit, how many teachers teaching in international schools are truly up to the task. My philosophy of learning and schooling comes from my life experience and then backed by science and research. I have an older brother who has a phenomenally high IQ. In the first percentile of the human race, our common maths teacher always told my struggling younger brother and myself. Today my older brother is an employee in a company that my younger brother owns and operates and runs as a CEO. That experience began my life question of why. We all know that when the brain and mind has a burning question why, the how and what will follow. And my why led to the kind of instruction we do in our schools, which is only partly an academic focus. If kids are academically, if they have the aptitude for great grades, they will get them. But we do have to find what kids are born for other than that. I recently published a book, largely because I wanted to advocate to teachers and parents that we need to actually change the entire focus of education, not just here, but internationally as well. So in a book I recently published called Who Do You Think You're Kidding?, I quote Andrew Hacker, professor of political science, whose research says, on the whole, most individuals with high IQ levels will peak during their academic years or perhaps during an initial job they receive on the strength of test results. However, after that, they will soon be surpassed by individuals who possess more applied forms of intelligence that are not necessarily revealed by tests. I also quote American psychologist Paul Torrance, who says that above 115 or 120 at the most, IQ scores have very little or no bearing on creativity. Why is this shift from a focus on IQ essential? Just as any major economic or social change has an implication on every aspect of life, globalization and the digital revolution have not only changed the way we work and play, but also the way we must educate our kids. The challenge around this is that we have the pressure that no matter which board our school opts for, the focus is still largely only on IQ and still not gauging development of SQ, PQ, and EQ in a manner in which we know students will be intrinsically driven to find his why, his purpose of being, or his life calling. We're also constrained by boards and also now by government policies and politicization of education. Not only are we entrepreneurs, schools dependent on government bodies for all our NOCs, etc., but now we have new government regulations and reforms like the RTE that we have to struggle with, where investors no longer want to invest in education. When I arrived in India, even elite schools, the few handful of them, were the kings, and parents were paupers, running from school to school in desperate search of the proverbial seat in the school. As private providers began investing in education, or teacher entrepreneurs like myself began inspiring high net worth individuals to invest, a subtle shift began, one which allowed parents to demand quality and allowed parents to also select a school that aligned with their philosophy. Is that my buzz? What this started was an increase in the quality of education being offered, as even old historical conventional schools were forced to innovate or lose their edge. I argue that we need economic freedom for schools. Competition between schools is the best way to increase the number of good schools, and only for-profit schools will have the incentive to expand. I'll quickly run through that. And I sort of advocate that schools need greater independence in setting fees, in setting the way that they will actually educate kids. I'm all for the RTE in spirit, but I urge politicians involved in education to have a dialogue with us on its implementation so that we don't go back to schools being king and parents the paupers. It used to take me on initiation of a school between 6 to 8 years to break even. With the RTE, when we remodel our business plan, the break even goes from 6 to 8 to 8 to 15 years. We pay taxes and education cess, but that no longer seems to be enough. My big question to politicians, if they keep intervening in education, who will continue to invest?